side case half clean. And before I put the shift cams in, we got to put the seals in. So just showing you this side, it's clean, and we will flip it over. And made a little tool here to put the seals on where it's easier to put these seals in. Seals go in right here. The thing I like about these 6-speeds is they got a bushing in the case for the shift cam to work in. Lasts a whole lot longer, does a lot better, and you can replace the bushings if they get loose. So I just drop the little tool with the seal. I got the seal on the bottom of it. Drop it in, and I tap it in with my brass hammer till it seats. And I'll put my other seal on. Tap it in. All right, seals are in. Give it just a little bit of oil. I've already put oil on the bushings on the inside of the case. I already have oil on my shift cams that go in next. And also too, I checked, and the distance between these shift cams is different. It is probably about 150 thousandths difference between the distance from here to here and from here to here, which means that when we turn this thing over and we start installing our sleeves and interlock pins, that they are different in length. Not only the outside sleeve, but the inside interlock pin. So keep that in mind whenever you start assembling these things. And what I like to do first is put the center cam in. And remember, we got to be careful going through our seal to make sure that we don't do damage to our seal that we just put in. Pops into place. I like to put the center cam in first, and whether you do the 1, 2, or the 5, 6 doesn't matter. But I like to do my sleeve spring. And the interlock goes inside the spring. And then one of the little detent balls go in. And I can put that assembly in. And then I'm ready to put the cam in this end, the 1, 2. This can be just a little bit aggravating because you're trying to get the detent ball in place and hold that inside the spring. All right, that one's in place. Now we'll go to the front and do the same for it. Sleeve, spring, interlock pin, check ball, and slide that assembly in. Ooh. That's why it's good to have a little magnet. Okay, once we get those in place, we need to make sure that they work, that we don't have anything obstructing or anything wrong. So I go in with an adjustable on the other side, and I make sure it shifts as it should. No interference, and everything feels free. Looks like those are good and in place. Now that we've done that, we'll put our forks in, which I have my forks here. This one was number 1, and I marked it at the top. And then this one was number 3, and I marked it at the front. And this was 5, 6, and I marked it at the front because our pads went to the rear. So our forks are in place, and now we're ready to assemble our cluster assembly and get our cluster ready to drop in. All right, we have our cluster shaft, our counter shaft clean, and I have all the gears ready to go back on. I've got them laid out, and there is a difference in how they come off and how they go back on. They go on back on the same way, but there is a difference in how they front and rear, how they go back on. And the good thing about this is these gears don't press on, they just slide on. On my assembly, they do anyway. I mark this gear on the front, and I'm going to load the shaft as we unloaded it. I also keep in mind that when I clean the shaft, I put the shaft in the lathe and I checked run out on the shaft because we know we had broken gears. So anytime that you have anything that you're in doubt about, it's best to go ahead and check it while you've got it apart. And that is the 6th gear and the 4th gear. And now we've got our snap ring to go back on. So we're ready for our snap ring. Okay, snap ring's in place. Now we're ready for our bearing. Since we had a gear failure, we don't know if the old bearing was hurt or not. I got a new bearing to go in it, so we're replacing the bearing also. And we have a snap ring that goes on first. And we're going to put a little bit of oil around it, a little bit of oil on the bearing. This is our mid bearing for the counter shaft. Then we have another snap ring that holds it in place. All right, those two are in place. Now we have a snap ring in the front of our gear set, which is 2nd and 3rd. So we'll put that snap ring on. Put a little bit of oil on the splines. Makes it easier for it to slide on. A little bit of oil around the inside of the splines. Our 3rd gear and our 2nd gear. And there is, excuse me, a difference in the front and the rear of this gear. As you notice, it's flat on the front. It has a ledge or an area that's not machined off at the back. 2nd gear is the same way. It gives clearance in between the gears so that you have a little gap in between the gears. So these do have to go back on the way that they came off, or a specific way. So we press or push this back on the shaft. Then we can load 2nd gear. Now we're ready for our snap ring. And you want to make sure that your snap ring is seated and in place and down all the way around. You don't want to have a snap ring partially on. You want to make sure it's completely on. Now we're ready for first gear. First gear didn't have a snap ring on the front, and the bearing on the back holds this gear in place. And there is a front and a rear. I'd mark this one. This is the front, this is the rear, and it also has a area on the back of it that gives it a little bit of a gap also. And when you put it in place, your bearing will hold this gear in place on the back side. And I just want this down enough to where that we can get our bearing started on this. And I may have to press this one just a little bit before we put the bearing on, and we'll do that, and then I'll put my reverse gear on. Press. I had to press the input gear on and the first gear on. Press the bearing. Remember, the bearing on the rear had no snap ring, and the bearing on the front has a snap ring, and the snap ring is at the rear, so that the snap ring sits down in the case and is against the case on the inside toward the front. Now all I like on the Clustershaft assembly is a reverse gear. We're going to stand it up. We can put our snap ring on. Because this reverse gear has two snap rings, one at the front and one at the rear. Tap it on. Okay. Put our other snap ring on. All right, snap ring is snapped into position. Everything looks good with our cluster shaft. And what we're going to do now, we've got the gear sets on correctly. There's spaces in between second and third and fourth and sixth. And the input and the reverse is on correctly. And the first gear is on and seated against the shaft, not only for first gear, but also for the input gear. Now we're going to drop this into our case hive, and then we can get ready for our main shaft assembly and get it together. All right. And that's our countershaft assembly, our case hive with the forks, cams in it, and we're ready to assemble now our main shaft assembly.